Hello everyone, we have reached the part of the clown decade where it's just not funny anymore. And I do mean that. I have been meaning to do a fair bit of election coverage, I will say, in these videos, but every time I've come to do one, there's basically nothing to talk about, or nothing that will take more than 5 minutes to say. And so, basically this video is just going to be a quick-fire round of things that have happened in the past week alone that just cause me eternal pain. First things first, Rishi Sunak's ITV interview came out yesterday. For those that don't know, he left D-Day early to have this political interview, and this caused an absolute massive media storm over the past week, as it deservedly should, because it is a ridiculous thing to do. And obviously, Rishi Sunak didn't think that leaving D-Day was at all something that people cared about. We can tell that because this is the first thing he said when he got to that interview.
Very nice to see you. Hey, sorry to
I'm
have
well,
kept
thanks
you.
No, not at all. I know
We were
you've been in Normandy.
Yeah, it all just ran over. It
course.
was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
I'm sure it was.
So apologies for keeping you.
No, not.
Sorry I'm late to this political interview, but, you know, the selfish soldiers and veterans of World War II, they ran over, memorising the horrible day that was invading the beaches of Normandy to push the existential threat that was Nazi Germany out of Europe forever. I'm sorry I was late, that ran over. I don't know how neither Rishi Sunak nor any of his aides advised him, yeah, maybe you should just stay for this whole thing. Maybe an ITV interview where you're not going to do very well anyway is worth missing D-Day for. Again, it's like they've forgotten that Boris Johnson basically didn't do any media interviews. He certainly didn't do the major one, which was Andrew Neil on the BBC. He just completely skipped over it and won by a landslide. They need to realise that interviews by the media, they're not that important, especially when compared to probably one of the last major D-Day anniversaries where the veterans are going to be alive. You know, if they're not 100 already, they're certainly pushing it. And obviously, the patriotic party in this race, the Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, obviously didn't like that Rishi Sunak missed out on D-Day, because why would he? And started saying that Rishi Sunak doesn't understand British culture. And what was everyone's reaction to that? Oh, he was accused of dog whistle politics after claiming Rishi Sunak returned early from D-Day events in France because he didn't care about our culture. Is that the best we can do? Really? Everyone complains that Rishi Sunak comes home early from D-Day for an ITV interview. Farage says the major reason that is a huge blunder, not even just politically, but just in general as well. People are annoyed at this because, yes, it is an affront to our culture. We hero worship D-Day because it was a heroic event. And yet as soon as that's pointed out because, oh, Rishi Sunak's brown, it's apparently racist, when this would be said of Keir Starmer if he left D-Day early as well. Because a huge issue at the moment is metropolitan London bubble elites not understanding what the rest of the country care about. That was the point here. Not Rishi Sunak is Indian and brown, but that he is an internationalist. And even then that doesn't make any sense because internationalists hate Nazis too, so it's beyond all, and I mean this, all reason as to why anyone allowed him to do this, let alone him and his aides thought it was a good idea. And this is part of a reason that I'm just in eternal pain with this election. The only reason I can put this down to is that Rishi Sunak is actually trying to throw the election, and I can't give you a good reason as to why he'd try and do that. He's a middle manager type. Rishi Sunak hasn't come up with an original idea in his life, so it must be the idea is coming from somewhere else. And when we get to the end, I have a couple of ideas for that. But for now, we'll continue with this machine gun of poor clips.
When you are wealthier than the king, what do you do day to day to make sure you're still in touch with the kind of struggles ordinary people face?
I mean, for a start, what a completely ridiculous question. I don't know why Rishi Sunak would have to do anything to cosplay as a poor person. As if anyone in the media who is, you know, above junior journalist level, especially when it comes to TV journalists, do anything to cosplay as a poor person. But the thing is that Rishi Sunak doesn't come back on the attack saying, yeah, I obviously don't do anything because why would I need to do that? I don't need to be poor to empathise with poor people. But no, instead he says something stupid like this.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right?
Can you give me an example of
All sorts
something?
of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
I mean, it's no secret that I was raised in a relatively comfortable environment. And the same thing happened with Rishi Sunak's family. My family didn't have Sky News. I don't think it was necessarily because it was unaffordable, but it was because my dad absolutely hates the idea of a Sky dish being put on the side of the house. Plus, we had Freeview, which still had over 100 channels, so at what point are you just being greedy? But it is the type of thing to say in the middle of this. I mean, I cut it out, but Rishi Sunak effectively says, yes, my parents paid for my education, therefore we had to forego with things, and all he could name was Sky TV. When really, I don't think there's anything wrong with being antagonistic to journalists that ask stupid questions like this. Because the whole idea is obviously to catch you out and say, look, you're not very relatable, are you? But I don't know why, but it never seems to be a strategy from politicians to say, to basically call this out. It's like, look, you're just trying to make me look bad. You don't even need to say it directly like this. But this is obviously a tactic to clip me to make me look bad, and that's all you're doing. It's very tedious, it's not very informative, and people forget that I look bad in this way in a week. So what is the point? But obviously Rishi Sunak is so bad at this that, well, it just gives journalists even more opportunities to ask him questions that make him look bad, either by saying, wow, you're pompous, aren't you? Or just by outright lying.
Isn't the truth that your problem is broken promises, and it's deeper than the last couple of years? It's Brexit too. It's migration.
So that part is correct. The Tories have completely broken their promises and completely gone the other way on migration. Again, 1.2 million migrants came in the country last year. And by the way, this election campaign, Rishi Sunak is only planning to halve that. And when he says halve it, he means halve net migration. So instead of having 700,000 in a year, it's going to be 350,000, as if that is the improvement that we need, as if that goes anywhere near far enough.
The NHS was meant to get better. We were all remember 350 million quid on the side of a bus, don't we? It's levelling up.
Again, the 350 quid on the side of a bus, the NHS got that money and more. Again, levelling up's been a bit terrible, but again, you want to look good in these interviews. Every time that NHS stat is brought up on the side of the Vote Leave bus, which again, not actually anything to do with the Tories, you could just say, oh, well, the NHS got that money. It got that money and more. The issue with the NHS isn't funding. We fund it as much as other countries in Europe. The issue is the system, which is what Nigel Farage says and gets shouted at. But again, eternal pain, this election. But to be honest, I put that partially down to, well, a lot of Tories want Brexit reversed, and what's a good way to do that? Make it look like Brexit failed. So, great. Anyway, I suppose on the bright side, journalists aren't really just going after Tories. Journalists have, I say morphed, this has basically always been true. Journalists think their entire job is to play gotcha with politicians. That's what they think their entire job is, and don't get me wrong, they're incentivized to do it because, you know, it allows for Twitter clips to be posted absolutely everywhere, such as in this video, so I'm hardly helping the incentives. But I will just say on the bright side, at least it doesn't just go all one way. And at least they are pointing out obvious lies as they go along. And our politicians are so useless, I don't understand how they're not ready for obvious questions. Again, this is the same Beth Rigby show, only this time being combative with Sir Keir Starmer.
No tax rises needed in the plans in our manifesto.
In the plans?
No tax rises for working people. That's income tax, national insurance,
so you're
and VAT.
not ruling out.
I mean, already, and I wish journalists didn't do this as much as they do, but already Beth Rigby's trying to interrupt to get her point out, because again, the ideal journalist would let who they're interviewing answer the question before they interrupt, but again, the shorter the clip, the better the Zoomers on Twitter and TikTok's attention span will keep up with what's going on. I say that like boomers have a good attention span on Facebook. I know they don't. But basically, yet again, she is asking this question to get this, and I'm gonna be honest here, get this pretty good line out.
I just decode that for you guys, because when a politician says no plans, it does mean I might.
Well, Beth,
I've done this a bit. It does.
She doesn't even get that point out particularly well, to be honest, but yes. A lot of the time when politicians say, oh, well, there's no plans to at the moment, that means we are definitely going to be doing that because our plans, yeah, yet again, have not been fully costed. And From what I've seen of the manifesto so far, yeah, that's pretty much true of all of them. Most of them are trying to get income from cracking down on tax avoidance, which is, you know, the loophole one. It's the legal version of avoiding tax, which, again, everyone does in some regard. Yet all that tends to happen when countries try and crack down on that is that they just make having to buy an accountant even more of a necessity, and it tends to hit middle incomes more than it does rich people, because rich people move their assets, move their money about, get accountants to find other loopholes, things like that. Completely pointless endeavour. And inevitably, taxes have to rise as a result of that. So again, expect your taxes to rise. Anyway, another reason for the eternal pain is that, yes, Labour are almost certainly going to get in, but the worst part about that is that nobody seems to actually want Labour to get in. Nobody finds Labour particularly popular. They are popular because the other parties are so immensely unpopular, mainly the Tories. As I have said for a while, the real winner of this election is going to be none of the above. It's going to be basically a choice for King Charles to rule unopposed. But we can't have that despite a democracy. But surely part of a constitutional monarchy is that when Parliament has no mandate to rule, the monarch takes over for a bit. That is, after all, what the people voted for, but it's so painfully obvious that no one wants Keir Starmer in charge either, that people are effectively calling him, much like Rishi Sunak actually, a middle managing robot.
I feel like you've formed into more of a politician than the person that I would have voted for to run the country. You seem more like a political robot. How are you going to convince others like me to vote for you?
Now, the last thing you should do here is give a robotic answer. Does Sir Keir Starmer do that?
Well, the most... Look,
I mean, honestly, on things like this, the most human thing to do would probably be to lean into that. Yeah, I am a bit of a political robot. I kind of need to be Prime Minister, I'm afraid. It's the most political position in the country. That would come off as a lot more natural and, ironically, human than trying to do what Keir Starmer does here, which is freeze to try and say, hang on, how am I not a political robot? Because, well, he is. And then it doesn't help when he keeps making robotic answers to every other question in the goddamn interview.
But, you know, and I accept I earn a lot of money in the job I am now in, but when I grew up, my dad was a tool maker. He worked in a factory. It's true.
Yeah, just a robotic off-the-shelf answer for, I know what it's like to be working class, my dad was poor. Which might be a fair answer, but, you know, sure, these were formative years, but honestly, people really do forget about their childhood by the time they're in the mid-20s. And after university, Starmer was never on bad money because he became a barrister. Which, honestly, if you want to try and say, oh, this is a great country because you can come from being the son of a toolmaker to becoming a barrister, then try and make that point, but he's trying to make out that he's eternally poor because his childhood was an experience of, you know, being in a poor family. That'd be fine if he said that, but he's not. He's trying to make out he's an eternal poor man. But either way, I don't know why so many people care about these personalities. But again, this is a problem I have and why I'm in eternal pain this election. There's basically no interesting questions going around. And I don't particularly blame this on people or journalists, because really what have we been given that we can ask interesting questions on? Because basically everyone's manifesto is either absolutely nuts or obvious lies. I mean, we touched upon it in the previous The Other Side of the Hill newscast, which you can see a link to in the description. But so far we've had a few manifestos come out, but the main ones we went through were the Tory summary points, which basically you just can't believe any of it because they've been in power for 14 years and lied about every other manifesto there. And then you had the Lib Dems, which was basically just Labour's, but really hard for getting back into the EU. And you can just tell that the Lib Dems are not having a serious campaign. This is the average Ed Davey interview.
This is a tightrope, I think, Tom, that Sir Ed Davey's about to walk. And there you have it, Tom, perfect placement there. Talk me through what's happening behind you. Oh dear.
Well, I mean, choose your political metaphor.
And to be honest, I can't blame Ed Davey for this. Why would he take it seriously? Parliament doesn't have power, as I've been saying for quite some time. This is why nobody's taking it seriously. Certainly not as seriously as history that I've read of, say, Margaret Thatcher's campaign or anyone else's, where Parliament was clearly the issue. Parliament wasn't dealing with the 3-day working week. Parliament wasn't dealing with the winter of discontent as effectively as they should. Margaret Thatcher gets in, transforms the country within a decade. You can't do that anymore because the Blairite and neo-Blairite governments that we've had for the past 2 decades have effectively outsourced absolutely every decision-making process. And basically everyone either wants to keep that status quo in place or wants to add to it. You know, the OBR, that decides your budget. The Bank of England, that decides your monetary policy. DEFRA decides subsidies and how farms should be run. And Liz Truss was absolutely correct, along with Dominic Cummings, that these need to go. There's hundreds of them, quangos they are called, effectively governmental organisations with absolutely no democratic process put in place. These people are just appointed, typically, yes, by ministers, but then once they're appointed, they are very hard to get rid of, and in fact, they are the ones that get rid of ministers, as we saw with Dominic Raab, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, all of these ministers that have been kicked out of their job because the civil servants don't like them. And Ed Davey isn't expecting to win any major seats this election. He knows he's winning his. Why would he make his campaign trail anything other than him being an overgrown child? Effectively, Britain gets the politicians it deserves, and this is, yes, very true here. Non-serious people on a non-serious campaign trail for a parliament that hasn't taken itself seriously for 10 years, apart from a brief bump to try and stop Brexit, a democratically mandated decision. Yet again, Parliament outsourcing its decision-making, though at least this time it was to the people of Britain. And then the Greens aren't doing that much better with their manifesto and campaign. Apparently the Greens pledged nationalisation of the biggest 5 energy companies, water companies and rail in their manifesto, as if rail isn't already centralised. How much is that going to cost? Absolutely no idea. Probably close to the trillions. I'm actually shocked that they stopped at those companies and didn't include the Royal Mail in that. And how are they going to do it? Well, they always say, oh, just tax the rich. Without any thought of second-order consequences. The Greens, again, are not a serious party either. They are basically the party of weed smokers, probably why they have such ridiculous manifesto pledges. I mean, Green candidates are so poor that even the hosts of the newsagents, who are notoriously poor when it comes to political interviews, can just run absolute rings around Green Party candidates. Here's a clip from an interview about why they want to get rid of the nuclear deterrent.
The argument for having nuclear weapons only as a deterrent reminds me strongly of the argument that you tragically hear young people giving sometimes for why they carry a knife. They say they're doing it to protect themselves, and they truly believe that. But the fact is that those who carry knives are more likely to be stabbed, sometimes by their own knife. Defending yourself, thinking that it's a deterrent like that.
We're not going to nuke ourselves, are we?
No, but somebody, it makes us a target, as I say.
And that last line was said after 2 minutes of Lewis Goodall making the point that just because we don't have nuclear weapons doesn't make us a target. We are a target because we are one of the major Western economies. Despite the managed decline of a couple of decades, though, to be fair, that is because the managed decline is pretty much worldwide. Basically, the political landscape in Britain at the moment is the 2 major parties basically don't care to actually try and govern in any particularly competent fashion. This whole election is them trying to point at each other saying they're going to tax you more, both of whom are lying about lowering taxes. I mean, this is just so painfully obvious that even Sky News interviewers can point it out. The rest of the parties knowing they're not going to win, so either making absolutely pie-in-the-sky promises that are not serious at all, or Ed Davey being pretty open about his not seriousness by just having fun on the campaign trail, which I appreciate a hell of a lot more than anyone else. And then you've got Nigel Farage, who actually seems to be at least taking the issues of crime, the economy, immigration, everything he's been an activist for, very seriously. And what's the best thing that the new elite can do about that? I think that can be distilled down into Emily Maitlis's tweet from yesterday. And this is so cringe I don't even know where to begin, so I'm just going to read it out. By popular newsagents' demand, name that penal reform policy quiz. Reform UK or El Salvador government. And if I was to ever personify this image into a single tweet, I think this would be exactly the tweet that I would attach it to. Automatic life sentence for violent offenders. Well, I hope that's a reform, UK. Oh, look at the answers, it is. Helicopters and drones to be used by everyday police forces. They are already used in the UK, so I have no idea why that's in this list, but that's El Salvador anyway. Police leaders replaced with military veterans. That's a reform, UK. I'm actually quite surprised at that, but good. They are ridiculously well trained in how to detain people and how to deal with violence. Yeah, they'd be pretty ideal for being within the police, especially as leaders. Young offenders face high-intensity training camps. That's Reform UK. Again, that's fine. Prison is supposed to be a little bit more than just trying to reintegrate someone into society. It's also supposed to be a punishment. No bail for people charged with organised crime. I hope that's reform, but it's not. That's El Salvador. Crackdown on cash-only businesses like barbers. That's Reform UK. I mean, it's basically an open secret there that they're a front for drug money, so fine. 7 automatic prison sentences for possession of a knife. Again, I hope that's... Do I want that, actually? It depends why you're carrying the knife, I suppose. If that is actually a policy that they have, but they don't put people in prison for carrying potato peelers, then I'd be fine with that. Finally, construction of a 40,000 capacity mega prison. Again, I really hope that's reform, because we need it. Oh no, it's El Salvador, that's a shame. But again, how is this anything other than the most based thing that you have ever read on Twitter? How is this in any way supposed to be, God, isn't reform bad? They want to get tough on crime. As if people haven't realised that crime is getting a little bit out of hand, and it's quite clear it's because the police are barely doing anything about it. But anyway, I mentioned before why it looks like the Tories, or Sunak specifically, are trying to throw this election. And honestly, I think a recent move by his Director of Communications could probably explain it all. Rishi Sunak's former Director of Communications, Amber de Button, has joined The Guardian as Chief Comms Officer. A little bit like when Sue Gray moved from the civil service straight over to Labour, it kind of sets alarm bells ringing in my head. And to be fair, Amber left Sunak's team September of last year. However, the problem is that if the Tories are hiring these types of people, there will be more than just her who left last year. But seriously, it has to be asked, why do the Tories, who have a very abrasive relationship with the media at best, hire someone with this CV? A journalist for almost 2 decades, Amber was deputy head of politics at Sky News before moving to ITV News, where she was head of politics and then head of UK News. At ITV News, Amber led a team across the UK covering the death of Queen Elizabeth II. I mean, this is all fine, but managed exclusives like Partygate and oversaw investigations including care homes during COVID and social housing, which led to changes in the law. All grand stuff, great, good investigative work. Amber managed coverage of several UK elections and negotiated multiple TV debates, including the first ever televised head-to-head debate in the UK, which are terrible and again, always seem to be only there for journalists who try and catch, Tories, Labour, whoever, the politicians out. Not particularly useful. So then she served as communications director at 10 Downing Street for a year, where she was in charge of the government's communication strategy, which, if there's one thing that I have always said that the government are terrible at, it's, their communications. Because it's either classic political lies or communication that's so useless it's meaningless. And so this woman was clearly hired by Rishi Sunak's team to be his head of communications. And if his team hired this woman, you can be sure that they hired other people like her who are happy to then move over to The Guardian of all newspapers. I say of all newspapers, there are definitely worse ones, but The Guardian is pretty infamous for poor domestic journalism. When it comes to foreign, they're not too bad, but the domestic stuff is basically just there to attack the right wing. So why would you then become Chief Communications Officer of that paper if you were in any way a defender of the right wing? And, I suppose that's what the problem entirely comes down to. The Tory party, whether cleverly or by complete accident, have to accidentally let the right wing actually take over the party every now and then. That's what you kind of had with Johnson until COVID. And then obviously when you had Liz Truss in, they think, oh no, we've got to contain the right wing now, otherwise they're going to bankrupt the country rather than just leave it in decline. At least that was the story going on in their head. And now we've got complete wets in charge who get rid of Home Secretary, like Suella Braverman, and seem to have absolutely no interest in actually trying to fix the problems of the country. Again, the only reason really to vote Conservative is if your local MP is actually going to be one of the based ones. If you happen to live in the constituency, of Liz Truss, Kemi Badenoch, Suella Braverman, God, there's a lot of women. You know, someone like that, then yeah, vote for them, maybe even over Reform, depending on the Reform candidate. But if they're a wet MP, why not vote Labour? You know, okay, we won't be as jailed as quickly with that Tory MP. That is better than Labour, but ultimately the Tory party's never going to move to the right if we keep voting the left-wing Tory MPs in. And that's the problem with this election. Absolutely everything interesting to talk about in this election isn't being covered anywhere, really. This is why I've had to quickfire all this, because I could expand all of these little points out to entire videos, but effectively I'm just saying the same thing on every single point, and it gets very boring. I've made an attempt to make about 2 videos this week, and both times I've just had to scrap them, because I'm just getting bored out of my skull. And it turns out that just dropping a huge, gigantic black pill is the way I'm having to make a video today. So I'll try and make up for it with a white pill video tomorrow, but that's if I can find one. Anyway, that is why the election is a complete disaster. We basically have absolutely nobody competent in either of the 2 major parties. Nigel Farage seems to be relatively competent, but there is no way he can build up momentum to get a majority of seats in Parliament by July the 4th. However, he will be making rather large challenges to the Tories, and in doing so, hopefully will force them to realise they actually, need to move quite a bit more right-wing, and hopefully purge an awful lot of the wets out of the party, an awful lot like Margaret Thatcher did, but obviously she didn't do it well enough. Right, anyway, hopefully I'll make another video this week, whether it's tomorrow or over the weekend, I do not know yet, but I know the content's been lacking this week. It's a mixture of things, but me being ridiculously bored by politics from this election has to be one of the major reasons. As for other streams, obviously, Tosh Talks next Tuesday. We are covering a specific topic, one that you can vote for if you join the Discord down below. And then secondly, obviously, Regional Variations is not on Wednesday, so I'm either replacing that stream with something else or replacing it with a video, maybe. I may do something to replace it, but no promises. And then finally, Laughing at the Guardian obviously returns next week. I still need to get guests. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you today, so once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.